Dr. Schlupp currently holds a position as Presidential Professor of Biology at the University of Oklahoma, and he's also the Associate Dean for Research in the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Oklahoma. He earned his PhD in 1995 at the Zoological Institute and Museum at the University of Klumberg. He completed postdocs at the University of Klumberg and the University of Würzburg, and was a Heisenberg Fellow at the University of Texas. Following that, he had his first faculty appointment in the year 2003 at the University of Klumberg. And shortly after that, in 2005, he accepted a faculty position at the University of Oklahoma and quickly moved through the academic ranks to receive full professor status in 2012, a position that he currently enjoys. Ingo's scholarship is remarkable. He focuses on a variety of topics, and I think you'll see some of that flavor come through today. In particular, he's studied the evolution of why sexual reproduction has evolved, has also focused on how organisms adapt to extreme environments, and looked at the evolution of mating behavior. He's published over 150 research articles, including publications in Nature, in Science, and pretty much every other top journal in his field. So he's remarkably well established in that regard. He has also been cited almost 4,000 times for his work, which is a remarkable thing. On top of that great scholarship, Ingo really takes pride and is a great contributor in the education arena. He has currently has given over 80 public lectures like this one. He's well sought after in terms of sharing the message of fishes and other issues related to evolution and conservation. He teaches courses in animal behavior, in animal communication, biostatistics, tropical field biology, so all of the great stuff that we all want to do. And recently he was the organizer for the annual evolution meetings in Norman, Oklahoma, so he's also a great contributor to the citizenship in his discipline. If we were to list all of the awards that Dr. Schlupp has received, he'd have about 5 minutes to give his talk, but recently, within the last couple of years, he has he's received or has been elected as a fellow of the National Academies as an education fellow in the life sciences. Has received the Frederick Wilhelm Bessel Research Award by the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, and holds an endowed professorship by Brian and Sandra O'Brien at the University of Oklahoma. Current research takes him to Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Germany, Mexico, and in the U.S.
It's okay. I think it's okay.
In all of these places, Ingo has developed his ongoing fondness for fishes. Today, he will be sharing this enthusiasm with us by giving the 28th semi-annual John Zimmer Distinguished Lecture titled The Amazing Social Life of Fishes. Please welcome Dr. Ingo Schlupp.
This mostly, did you know that he's a liar? But I feel deeply honored. I'm very, very excited to be here. I'm very happy to be here. This is something really special. Being able to kind of step outside of your lab and your normal routine and talk to, people that, among other things, I mean, you had so many options for tonight, right? You could have watched a basketball game, or you could have just passed out in front of your TV. But here you are. You're here, and you want to hear me talk about fishes. So I'm deeply honored by that. And really, what I want to do tonight is you'll see some data slides, and I'll talk a little bit about research, and I'm also vain enough to talk a little bit about my own research. But really, what I want to do tonight is, tell a few stories and share the enthusiasm and excitement with you that comes with being a scientist. And Jerry and I were just talking about this. It's a real blessing to be able to do the work we do. We get to educate young people. We get to do amazing research. So that's really what I want to do tonight. Talk about that. So before I embark on this journey, I'm sure going to fall off here because the carpet is the same color. But, so before I break a leg, I just want to point out that all research nowadays is a team effort. And I've been really lucky. I've had wonderful collaborators. I've had wonderful postdocs, grad students, undergrad students. So from now on, when I say I mean actually they. Because those are the people that do the hard work. So these are just wonderful people. Most of them, many of my grad students now have really nice positions in good research universities. So I'm really proud of that. Another thing that I want to point out is that science is, and what I do is really relatively cheap. You know, I'm mainly a behaviorist, so animal behavior is not that expensive, but even that needs external funding. And I've been lucky, I've always been able to attract funding externally and internally from US sources, German sources, but this is really critical. We need money. So, and sadly, currently the funding rates, the federal funding for science is going down, and relatively speaking, and that's really creating a very competitive environment for us scientists. So the fact that Jerry and I are still friends is only possible because we are both funded by NSF. Once that ends, things will change substantially. Okay, so just to give you a quick flavor of what I do, I'm just putting up the slide here. And if you want to find out more, you can go to my lab website. So I'm actually working on a couple of different topics, but today I will only have time to talk just a tiny little bit about this system here, Amazon mollies. I'll say a few things about those fishes in a moment. All the other topics are also really, really cool, and I'd love to have time and talk to you about those. But in the 2.5 hours that I have tonight, just kidding, I'm going to focus on something. So now, since Jerry mentioned that I'm also an educator, I'm going to pass out some little index cards here. I used to play basketball, so I'm not jumping off here. This my knees hurt. Can you pass this around? So on this little card, write down, please, for yourself. Pass this around, please. I'm going to take those back here. You can pass those around. Write down for yourself, what's the pinnacle of social behavior? The one behavior that you think is most indicative of sort of highly evolved social behavior. And then just one keyword. We don't want to spend too much time on that. What's the pinnacle of social behavior? Is it having a family? Is it I don't know, cooperative hunting, whatever comes to your mind. So write that down for yourself. Take a few seconds, talk to your neighbor, ask what your neighbor is writing down. And then at the end of this presentation, I want to come back to this, and I'm actually going to ask you if I was able to kind of show you that this pinnacle was actually reached within fishes. So that's my goal. I want to convince you that some of the most sophisticated behaviors can actually already be found in fishes. Okay. By the way, that's an active learning technique that we use in teaching. It's called pair share. So you write down something and then you talk to your neighbor. And then the students can discuss this. Okay, now we're going to start for real. And I want to share something with you, just a little story. So when I got this email inviting me to give this lecture, I replied. I write really short emails. I probably just said yes, or sure, or something like that. Or maybe I said why not. And then I was sitting at my desk, like, why would I do this? It's a lot of work. It's a public lecture. You can't just pull out your research lecture. So, and it's scary. We scientists, we live in this place here. We live in this ivory tower. We're not used to talking to normal people. We're just not used to that. We're not exposed to real life very much. So it's a real challenge for us. But it's also incredibly important for people like me and Mark and Jerry, Jack, to go out and talk to regular people because you're funding us. So we want to be able to explain to you what we're excited about, why what we do is important for society, why what we do is exciting and important. But since we're living here, this kind of a setting with normal people in the room gives us this expression here. But I decided to go ahead and do it anyway. So what does a good scientist do? Create a concept map. So aspects of social behavior, and then actually this is for real. I use this, but very little of this will actually pop up in the lecture today. Okay. So we're going to visit a few stations tonight. Role of kinship. That's kind of that's an important social glue that keeps together social units. And kinship means closely related organisms, siblings, for example, parents and offspring. That has a really important role in social behavior. We're going to look at the social environment, how the social environment influences important decisions. We'll learn the distinction between private and public information. This is a public lecture, so I'm not doing certain things that I might do in private, and I hope you do the same. And then we'll talk a little bit about leadership, and I'm going to end on that. And leadership is actually, it's a really interesting research topic because it's an emergent property. If you take, and we'll use fishes of course as an example, but if you take a group of fishes and they have to do something together, there will be emergent leadership. There'll be one fish out front. And I'm really interested in trying to understand that. And with colleagues in computer science, I'm using modeling techniques to kind of get to that. So I'll give you a brief taste of that. So that's going to be the journey for tonight. I'm going to start with a question. So, can any organism ever really be asocial? And I went to the internet. All the images you're going to see tonight are stolen from the web. Thank you, Al Gore. So, the probably most asocial thing that you can think of is a grizzly bear that really wants to be left alone and is quite aggressive and they don't want to be bothered. So, can they really be asocial? Well, it's a hypothetical question because the answer is obviously no, because if you want to make little grizzly bears like that cute one here, you have to show some degree of social behavior, and that's going to be our first stop. We're going to talk about kinship and the role of social, and develop that into the role of social behavior. So, a little background here. This is the first fish example. So probably the most important decision any organism makes, most important social decision is who to mate with. How do you pass on your genes? With whom do you team up to pass on your genes? And how do you pick? So these are all male guppies. These are all guppies that were bred for, actually for us. They're bred to please our aesthetic senses. It shows us a couple of different things. One is there's actually a lot of variability in the guppy gene pool that you can actually tickle out by artificial selection. But just put yourself in the shoe, that's not a good analogy, not a good metaphor either. Just think of yourself as a female guppy for a moment. And think about what kind of a question that is, having to pick out of all these different males. So how do you do that? How do you make that decision? And that's a super critical decision, and it's super critical for females because very often that's the one thing that they do. And then they have offspring. That's how they pass on everything they have. For males, it's often slightly different. They can have multiple partners. For many species, females make this really critical decision only once. So it's a difficult one. So in this context, I want to introduce this gentleman here. It'll get a little bit theoretical here, just for a moment. So this is an Englishman that some of us know. I know him as Chuck D. Many of you will recognize him as Charles Darwin. And Charles Darwin, when he was writing his seminal work that came out on the origin of species, he actually had to deal with a large number of problems, a large number of apparent inconsistencies in his theory. And one of them was the evolution of ornamental traits like this. It's not easy to understand that from the viewpoint of natural selection, because not only females are attracted to beautiful males like this, also predators, parasites. So there's a cost to being beautiful and attractive like this. So Darwin solved that by introducing sexual selection theory. And he said, basically, in addition to natural selection, we can also have sexual selection. And traits can evolve under sexual selection, and they may be countered by natural selection, but sexual selection can lead to ornamental traits in males. So Darwin proposed two mechanisms for this. One was female choice, so the females would pick the male that they wanted to mate with, or male competition. So both of these ideas, both of these theories are super well supported now. And the example I just gave you with guppies is an example for female choice. So the female would pick one male out of these many different options and then mate with that male. Guppies, like all the fishes that I work with, have internal fertilization. They're life-bearing. So the sperm actually has to be transmitted from the male into the female, just like in mammals. And that will be important later on. Okay, so this is the book that he produced. 1859 it came out. Caused quite a stir at that time, still a little bit contentious. But this book was the foundation for everything we talk about today. So you really can't give a good talk about any aspect of biology without mentioning Chuck D. And he really deserves the credit. I mean, this man must have been an absolute titan, a genius. So in this context, we recognize it's all about reproduction. So we really have to focus on how reproduction plays into everything. And I'm going to try to develop that for the next few minutes. I've already said that when we reproduce, when organisms reproduce, one thing they do is they pass on their genes. So they do give their own genetic information to their offspring. And that's creating a very intensive bond. And we're all really intensely affected by what our children do. We're very close to our parents. So what this tells us is how important kinship really is. And kinship was recognized in the 1960s by another English guy, Bill Hamilton here, who sadly passed away a few years ago, way too young. He was another titan in the field. And Bill recognized how important kinship is, and he developed a theory, a mathematical theory, which I'll explain in the next 4 or 5 slides. Just another joke, just a joke. A friend of mine who's a theoretician told me that for every equation you show, you lose half of your audience. I can't afford that tonight. So no equations. But kinship is important. The most extreme form of relatedness, of kinship, in humans is to have a full twin. So these beautiful ladies here, they're full twins. Same oocyte, same sperm, they're identical clones. And I'm going to use this example here to do a little excursion into some of my own research. because one of the fishes that I study actually is clonal. So we're going from human twins to a clonal fish. But before we do that, I want to give you an example. This is not my work. This is from a German group, and they studied these absolutely beautiful, gorgeous little cichlids. They're dwarf cichlids, and what they found is that in the baby cichlids, like these guys here, when they're raised in a family, in a group of kin, they're growing better, they're doing better, and so that's another example for the power of kinship. What's also interesting in this particular example is not only did they better when they were with close family, they also did better when they were together with friends, with individuals that they were familiar with. So in a way, and we see this in humans all the time, we can sort of, other than looking at just the genetic family that we're related with, we can also pick our own family and pick good friends, and that's actually good for us, and it's good for these little cichlids. But now, I really want to come to these guys here, and this is now my own research. A grad student did this. I'll show you her photo in just a second. But I want to tell you a few things about these fishes. They're highly, highly unusual. And that makes them just a fascinating, wonderful research subject. So these fishes they're all female. There are no males in that whole species. They're all female. We call that clonal. What they do is they do not reproduce by what we would call normal sexual reproduction. They basically take body cells, those are also egg cells, but they're genetically identical to their body cells, and then those turn into new fishes. Those are called Amazon mollies, Amazons after the mythical Greek tribe, because they don't have males. Okay, there are a couple of complications here. One complication is they don't have males, but to trigger the development of an embryo, to actually have a baby, like this beautiful one there in the back, to have a baby, they need sperm. Okay, so that's confusing, right? I just told you they don't have males. So where would the sperm come from? Well, they're actually stealing sperm, or loaning, whatever you want to call that. They're using sperm from males of a different species. Okay, so an additional complication is these are also life-bearing fishes, just like the guppies that we've already talked about. So these females sort of have to seduce males to mate with them in order to reproduce. Okay, that's a long introduction. Now we're going to arts and sciences. I'm an associate dean for arts and sciences. This is another beautiful story. This is actually for real. I'm not making this up. It's too good to be true. So this is a band. They don't tell them that I said that, but they're actually not very good. So these ladies founded a band in the Bay Area, and they called themselves Amazon Mollies. Somebody told me about this, so I found them on the web. I actually made contact with the band leader. I think this lady's the band leader. And I asked her, why on earth did you call your band the Amazon Mollies? And it turns out, this is the power of science. It turns out they saw an exhibit of life-bearing fishes in the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and they were intrigued by Amazon Mollies and decided to name their band Amazon Mollies. Now,
so they seduce.
What? Well, since you bring it up, later on they've added a male drummer. That's all I'm going to say. I would be happier if the music was better, but anyway. So, Amazon mollies are asexual clones. So that's the most extreme form of relatedness. they're all full twins. And even the ones from the next river over, and even the ones that are from Texas, are very similar to the ones that are from Mexico. So they're really similar on the species level. Now, my student Amber came to me and said, you know, can they tell a full sister from a sister that's not quite as related? And I said, why do you want to know that? Why would you be interested in that? And she said, well, you know, they're very aggressive, they're constantly beating each other up, and relatedness might be behind that. I said, okay, if you really want to study this, it's going to be really a lot of work, and it's not going to be very gratifying, and it's going to end up nowhere. It's just not, they can't do this. They're so closely related, they'll never be able to find out if they're choosing between a full sister and a not quite so full sister. Luckily, this is Amber. Luckily, Amber doesn't take advice from me. She's smart. So Amber said, I'm going to do this anyway. And she did. She invested a lot of work into this. She started 8 different clonal populations, so you're going to see that in one of my data slides. 4 were from Mexico, 4 from Texas. And what she did is she took a virgin female from each of these populations that we had collected ourselves in the field. She isolated that female, she made it that to one male, and it was always a male from that particular population. And then this way she created a clonal lineage. And then later on she did some genetics work to show that these are actually full clones, and they are. So she came to me and said, I'm ready to do some experiments. And the logical thing to ask here is, well, you know, we have this clone here from South Texas. Can they distinguish between their full sisters and a clone from central Mexico? Let's say Tampico. So that was her question. The experiment that you would do with something like that is actually really simple. You do what we call a binary choice test. So you basically take one fish, that's the chooser, you put that in the middle. We'll see a little panel of that in just a moment. You put the chooser in the middle, option 1 on the left side, option 2 on the right side, and then you let the chooser choose for a while, and then they make up their mind, and they basically hang out with their preferred partner. So that's how we measure this. It's based on association time. What Amber found was that actually all of the clonal lineages that she had created, except for one, were fully capable of making that distinction. So that's amazing. So this is like 100% related and 95 or 99% related. There's almost no recognizable difference, certainly not something that I could see. So Amber came to me with this and she said, this is pretty neat, isn't it? Let's go publish this. And I said, no. I gave her more advice. I said, no, we can't publish this because we have no mechanism for this. So I'll show you one more slide, then I'll move on. So Amber came back and showed me this data here. And this is an experiment that she had done where she presented the same task, so the same choice situation, where a clonal sister had the choice between another clonal sister and some other Amazon molecule that's not quite as related. And she created different experiments that only allowed certain sensory information to be transmitted. So would you be able to find your partner with your eyes closed? Yeah, you would. How about with your nose closed? Yes. With your eyes open, nose closed? Yes. So we combined all these different sensory modalities, and it turns out, to my surprise, and I'm still surprised by this, that we find the strongest signal when it's only visual, and but they can basically detect this difference between full clonal sister and not quite so full clonal sister using any sensory system and any combination. We did some controls, so it's not an artifact. Amber took this experiment to a field situation. She tested wild Amazons, and they also can do it. She did morphometric analysis. So this is all for real. So you're one of the first to hear this, because this is not published yet. So this is going to be submitted in the next couple of days. So a really, really cool finding that shows you the power of kinship and the relevance of kinship. Because Amber was right. What they do is they use this ability to recognize full clone versus not quite so full clone to regulate aggression. So what they do, these Amazons, they're not nice fish. These guys here, they are super aggressive. They beat up everybody. They even beat up the males that they need to reproduce. How smart is that? So, what Amber found, and this is a follow-up study that we just finished, what Amber found is that they base their aggression on relatedness. So if they're really closely related, they're not very aggressive, and with more distance and relatedness, they become more aggressive. And when you put them together with females from another species, they become outright mean. Okay, so that's Amber's story. And for the grad students, the take-home message here is don't listen to your advisor. Of course, if it's Jerry, you want to listen to him, but should I be your advisor, don't listen to me. Okay, I want to show you another thing, and this is, again, injecting a tiny bit of theory here. So the experiment that we just talked about would be essentially the green and the red dots on this panel here. So you have a choosing organism, you have the stimulus 1, you have the stimulus 2, and that's a binary choice test. And that's actually a paradigm that we use very often. We use that quite a bit in animal behavior. And we use association time. So if the chooser moves closer to this stimulus here, then we say that's the preferred individual that they want to spend time with. And that's a very solid experimental paradigm. The only problem with that is it's, biologically speaking, completely unrealistic. This is not how mate choice actually happens, or any decision making happens in nature, because we all know that very few fishes are completely solitary. So they're often, almost always, in social groups. We'll see some photos of that in just a moment. So a more realistic, but experimentally more difficult to use paradigm is to add somebody as a social component to the choice situation. So we typically call that an audience. Somebody's watching. So this, if you're just alone with the choosers just alone with stimulus 1 here, that would be a private situation, only 2 players in this game. And once you add the audience here, you have a public situation. And all the information that individuals provide becomes public. So one of the, and so surprisingly, this kind of paradigm hasn't been used very much. So the first question that comes to mind here is, if you have a situation where there is public information, does that change the behavior of the chooser? Do you factor, if you're the chooser, if you have to pick between 2 alternatives here, do you factor in that somebody's watching you, if you know that? If you don't know that somebody's watching you, then that's eavesdropping, but we're not interested in eavesdropping. So would you factor this in? Well, I think for humans the answer is obvious. The answer is yes. And that's what I meant when I said, I hope you don't behave in this audience here like you would behave at home, where you have privacy. So we established this research paradigm many years ago, and we've been using it quite extensively. And there's actually a large number of questions that can be addressed in this, and that suddenly kind of change our understanding of the evolution of behavior and the role of behavior in decision making. I'll give you one example from human behavior. just to highlight what I put on here, that meaning depends on context. So this is the same hand gesture here. It's this. And the meaning, you can play along with me. The young man there already plays along. The meaning of this gesture depends on the cultural, the social context. So, in Egypt, this means be patient. Okay? In Italy, it has a slightly aggressive connotation. It means, hey, what do you mean? And in Greece, it means that's perfect. So at the end of my talk, I'll let all of you do this to me, but I get to pick what it means. Okay, so the meaning of the same signal, if you will, completely depends on the context. So how can we use this in animal behavior research and fish research? Very simply, we ask, for example, would fishes lie? Do they try to manipulate their environment? And would they lie? Would they deceive others? And the answer is yes. So this is work that was done by a postdoctoral associate of mine, Martin Plott. And Martin came up with this experiment where he basically asked a male to show a preference for a female. And he did this in two different ways. He asked them to show a preference for large versus small males, and they prefer large females. Males prefer large females. And he also asked them, would you prefer to spend time with a conspecific or a heterospecific? And the heterospecific, the other species, was again our Amazon molly. So these males are completely capable of recognizing the correct species, and they prefer to spend time with their own female, as they should, right? So they want to mate with conspecific females. All right, so that's what they do when they're by themselves. Now, with an audience, and we manipulated the system, we gave them an audience of the same species, a male of the same species, a competitor, if you will. So we gave them that and asked them again. And it turns out that they're completely flipping their opinion. And they're now spending time with what at first to them was really unattractive. And the interpretation that we came up with for this behavior is they're trying, because we know from another study that these males will copy, the watching male, the audience male, will copy this behavior. So they're trying to deceive the other male into spending time with the less attractive alternative. That's pretty neat, right? Who would think that fishes can actively lie and deceive? I'll show you another example. This might be more stunning. Would fishes, we think of fishes as being relatively simple, right? Okay, so what's the best advice that you can find for managing your stocks in the stock market? Well, you imitate what the best people, Warren Buffett, if you could find out how he's investing, you would do the same thing, right? Well, I certainly would. So we're imitating, we're copying a lot of behaviors. Humans are actually masters in imitation. So we're constantly using information, social information that's provided by other members of our species to show behaviors, right? There are behaviors that are infectious. If somebody would start laughing right now, we would all be compelled to also laugh. That's social facilitation, has a component of imitation to it. So we were interested in finding out if fishes would also imitate. Again, this is about social behavior of fishes. So we've already found out that they can lie. Now we want to know if they would imitate. And of course, you know the answer, it's yes. So in this particular experiment, what we did was we tricked these females here, and we gave them a choice between a small male and a large male. And now comes one of my favorite sentences of all talks I give. Of course they prefer the large male. That's good, isn't it? Okay, so they prefer the large male. So what we then do is we let this female that shows a preference for this large male, we let her see an interaction of the non-preferred small male with another female. And again, we manipulate the system, and this other female is again our friendly Amazon Molly. So really, this female has no reason to change her mind. She doesn't like small males, and she should not be listening to anything that Amazon Mollies are doing, right? This is the sexual female. She should be mating with the large male. Okay, so we give her this social manipulation, and then we ask her again, well, what you going to do now? Are you sticking with that preference for the large male, or do you change your mind? I actually did this experiment myself. I was a complete skeptic. I did not think this would work, but it did. So this is what we found. We call this copying. It's just another word for imitation behavior. And to everybody's surprise, we were able, by creating this special social environment, we were able to trick these poor females into spending a lot more time with the initially unpreferred male. And we always do control experiments. There was no effect. So what we were able to show, and at the time, 94, this was a real sort of breakthrough, what we were able to show is that these fishes would actually imitate, and we tricked them into doing something quite stupid. So the social information that we used was so important to them that they would do things that were actually not really good for them. So we can manipulate them to actually lie. They do lie, they do deceive, and they will copy and imitate quite a bit. And we've used this concept many times ever since, and they really like to imitate. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you that the social environment is really, really powerful. I'll give you one more example before we move on to leadership and then come to a conclusion here. Okay, what do you see here? You see, this is a blue-headed wrasse. It's a fairly common reef-living species, so we're now in marine environments. And these fishes do something that is absolutely amazing. They can change their sex. So this here is a beautiful male, blue-headed duck. So they live on corals, and they actually, when you think about it, they're living in a really hostile environment with their coral, and then to get to the next coral, it's really risky. It's very dangerous, and chances are they're not going to make it. Okay, life happens, our beautiful male dies. Well, where's the next male going to come from? We can't expect a neighboring male to come on over because it's too dangerous, it's too risky, and it's too far away. So what happens is the next largest female, so this is a functional female, she had laid eggs before, it's a functional male. The next largest female in that particular group, over the period of a few days, but it happens rather quickly, will change her sex. She'll show this male coloration and turn into a functional male. And it's based on the social environment. It's triggered and controlled by the social environment. So social behavior can even change the sex. And if anybody quotes that out of context, I'll sue you. Okay. Final stop. We're going to talk just a little bit about leadership. So, actually many animals have these amazing aggregations. This is a flock of birds, starlings, which are invasive here in the U.S. They're native to Europe. So they form these enormous groups, and people have for a long time been interested in finding out, knowing how they can maneuver like this. So you have thousands and thousands of starlings, or thousands and thousands of herons. I'll come to herons in a moment. So how do they organize their maneuvers? Well, they're essentially all equal. They're about the same size, they're about the same age, they're about the same everything. So how do they make up their mind? Do they actually have leaders? Well, they don't. When they're flying around like this, they don't have a vote. They're not going through primaries, and they're not picking between the Trumps and Clintons and whatnot. So in this case, leadership becomes what we call an emergent property. It's something that automatically, spontaneously happens in these groups. So since this is a fish talk, I'm going to use herons here as an example. And they show these amazing, wonderful evasive maneuvers. And here is one where they form a tunnel, and they will show this whenever they're being. These are actually not herons. So this is a disclaimer. This is something else. This is a tropical species, but herons do the same thing. This is one of the evasive maneuvers that they can show, and they do this as a social group to get away and confuse predators. It's highly efficient, it's been shown over and over again, so this is an anti-predator behavior. And I just want to show you the emergence of leadership and how we tackle this. So this is work done by my colleague and friend Brent Eskridge, who's a computer scientist at a small university in Oklahoma City. And he can do something that I can't do, which is model things. And there's a technique called agent-based modeling. If you're inclined, this is a very fascinating technique. And so Brent and I designed this model, and what we're trying to understand here is, and don't worry about the parameters or anything here. This is actually a really simple story. So what we're after is, in a group like this, in a group of herons like this, or starlings, how do you actually get leadership? And what are the criteria under which this can evolve? And how stable is it? So can anybody be a leader? Anybody here in this room could be a leader. But once you have a leadership role, how likely are you to give it up again? How likely is it that somebody else steps in? And from our agent-based modeling, very surprisingly, we find that if you, and so early on, all of these little agents, think of them as individuals if you want, they're equal. They have the same parameters, but based on their individual experience, which is manipulated in the model, based on this individual experience, they become either leaders, those are the guys up here, or followers. There are a few leaders, many followers, we know that. But what's important here is there are almost no transitions. So once you're a follower, you're kind of stuck in that role, at least in our model. And there are very few transitions. This would be one, we have 2 or 3 more here. And so once you're a follower, once you're a leader, that is then socially reinforced, and you stay in that role. So it's an emergent property that then sticks to us. So how does that relate to fishes? I'll show you one example here that's loosely related to that. And I picked that just because it's such a cool story. Herrings and orcas. Herrings are actually food items for orcas, also known as killer whales, but we're not supposed to say killer whales anymore. So, orcas. These are majestic, beautiful, beautiful organisms, and I'll use them I'll use them in my final part of the talk as honorary fishes. But, just to be clear, they're not fishes. They're actually mammals. So if there's one thing that you learned tonight, that is, orcas are mammals. Okay. So herrings would be prey items for orcas. So whenever an orca comes by, herrings should show evasive maneuvers and also confusing maneuvers like this, right? Okay, so this was used by this French research group, and they did this amazing experiment where they actually captured a whole group of herrings, which was about 1.4 tons. They put them into a sea cage, just a huge cage out in the ocean, and then using a pulley system, they simulated a predator attack. And the herrings showed the proper behavior and showed some kind of evasive maneuvers and stuff like that. But of course, a model is not a real predator. So then they got interested in, well, how would they respond to a predator if they know that there is a predator around? So tying back to what we talked about with audience effects. So they created some playback. They recorded some orca vocalizations and played that back to our group of herrings that are sitting in that huge cage out in the ocean. And after being primed, so after they had this additional information that there actually are orcas nearby, when they then saw the model predator, their evasive maneuver was much stronger. Isn't that a neat story? Just the experiment, I would have loved to be there for that experiment. Okay, so I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to treat these orcas as honorary fishes, and I'll take you. And I hope this is not going to be too grueling for you. But remember, we're talking about the pinnacle here. So I'm going to show you just a few seconds of this video, and then I'm going to stop talking. So these blackfish here show a behavior that is just plain amazing. I didn't like the commentary to this, so I'm just going to do that myself. So here we have blackfish, and they're about to attack this. Did you just see this? Okay, poor seal. For the record, I love seals. They're not in great shape here. Look at that. So this is another seal, another seal. So they do this all the time. So what does that tell us? These blackfish, what kind of blackfish? They do hunt cooperatively. This is super sophisticated when you think about it. They have to anticipate. They have to know that there actually is a seal on that ice floe. They have to coordinate. All of these behaviors are extremely complex. And the whole pod has to work hand in hand, fin and fin, to create this wave that then wipes the seal into the ocean. That's pretty cool. That's super amazing. So that shows you, again, the power of social behavior in fishes, broadly speaking. Can you forgive me, Gary? Okay. So I'm pretty much done. I promised to stay under 2 hours. I did. So I just want to do a few closing remarks. So we're in a great museum here, and I'm worried about museums. Museum science is extremely important. Museum collections are the backbone for a lot of research that we do. So we really need to fight to keep museums going and alive. And I'm so pleased and so happy that you're here and that you're showing interest in the museum. That's one of the things I wanted to say. The other thing is, this is a little more bleak, so I didn't want to start out with something like this. But the truth is that pretty much all freshwater and marine ecosystems are threatened. They're threatened by human activity. And that's not necessarily climate change. They're threatened by everything we do, by consuming water, by using water for energy production, by using water for agriculture. We're basically taking water away from all these beautiful and super interesting, fascinating organisms that happen to live in water. So one of the things that I always try to bring across is that these organisms provide indispensable services for us, and that it's our job to keep their habitats intact, and that we need to work and protect freshwater and marine ecosystems. And on that note, I am actually going to end, and I will shut up now. That's not me. How terrible. What if that would not have been a harmless jingle? Maybe the Amazon models. Okay, thank you so much for your attention. It's been an honor to be able to talk with you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Sorry, in the back, please.
So how to do that?
It's okay, no worries. We'll have plenty of time.
So how do the Amazon mollies like seduce the other males? Like, how do they be attracted to their own species? Like,
Well, they are attracted to their own species too.
What's the question?
The question was why would males be seduced by the Amazon mollies? Are those males not attracted to females of their own species? And of course they are. So it's sort of a numbers game. The Amazon mollies have to mate probably once, twice in their life, and so they have to be really good at seducing. That's actually where you use, not me. But so they have to seduce the males, but the sexual females will still have mating partners. Sir, in the back. Yes.
Is there any evidence for rare male effects among the mollies? In some species, if
Yes.
they have a choice between two different kinds of males,
Right.
they'll pick the rarer one, and it doesn't matter which one it is as long as it's rare versus common.
Right. We've never tested that, so that's a completely open question. The rare male effects are quite common. So the assumption behind that is that it's a mechanism to generate gene flow, and that's quite likely the actual explanation for it. In Amazon mollies, we've never looked at that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes.
What advantage would there be to reproducing by cloning as opposed to sex reproduction, which creates diversity?
Oh, that's another hour. No, I can give you a short answer. So, and I hate to say this because I'm a guy, but from an evolutionary point of view, males are pretty much useless. Evolutionary speaking, they're not that important. So, for a female, there are quite substantial costs that are associated with sexual reproduction. So, for example, due to this funny mechanism that all higher organisms have, they're reducing their genome by half. So they're basically throwing away half of their genome, and then they have to find a mate to get back to the full genome size. So that's a huge cost. But the biggest cost is probably this. For a female, she has to produce sons so that this game can continue. So out of 10 offspring, she will have 5 daughters and then 5 sons. If you don't do this, if you're a female and you have the ability to clone yourself, and no worries, humans can't do that. This ends kind of with reptiles. Jack is an expert on that. So the real cost lies in producing males. So if you can skip that, you have a huge advantage in the short run. In the long run, it turns into a disaster because there's no genetic diversity. But in the short run, this is a super successful strategy. So the question becomes, why do we not find that more often? Because it's quite rare. It does happen, so we have proof of concept. It can happen. It's not very common. And people like me would really like to understand why this is not kind of the default mechanism. Was that a sufficient answer?
Sure, that's always the question. It's an energy cost as opposed to diversity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. Yes. Yes, sir.
Back to the mollies, you had the 4 Texas populations and 4 Mexico populations.
Yes.
Those are geographical differences, of course, but was there any attempt to look at genetic differences among the Texans, among the Mexicans, versus between those groups?
Yeah, we did that. Used microsatellites. Overall, within the species, genetic variability is rather small, and so we were trying to find genetic differences based on distance, and we couldn't find that. But I think our study may have been a little bit too limited. We only had a limited set of genetic markers for that, but it was good enough to prove that these are actually clonal lineages and that we didn't have any contaminations in there. So that was the intent for that particular study. We have some larger data sets that are not fully analyzed yet, and we published a really large data set using mitochondrial DNA to capture the diversity that's within Amazon mollies from the whole geographical range. They do occur from South Texas up to about Tampico, Mexico, along the Gulf Coast. And the diversity within Amazon mollies is very limited. The diversity within the sexual species is what you expect for widespread species. It's enormous. Yes?
Do we know what it is about having sperm that makes the clonal mollies reproduce?
So the question is, do we know what actually happens when the sperm encounters the egg cell in the Amazon molly? And the short answer is, we have absolutely no idea. That's very short, right? So I could give you a couple of ideas and what I think is happening, but we really don't know. It's completely unresolved. It's difficult to study because they have internal fertilization. So all of these really interesting things happen inside the female, and we can't really get the system into the petri dish where we could study this under a microscope. So we simply don't know. More questions? All right. So as you're leaving, take a look at your card again. See if I touched upon what you consider to be the pinnacle of social behavior. And maybe not, maybe one or two of you did write down something that I actually covered. And I just hope that I was able to give you a taste of what fishes can do in the area of social behavior. And I want to thank you again for coming tonight.